So my name, as was mentioned, is Heather McKenzie. I'm the Executive Director at Solar Alberta. Just want to take a minute to acknowledge that I'm presenting to you today from Amiskwaciwaskahagan, also known as Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which is located on Treaty 6 territory and the homelands of the Métis Nation. Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place and home of many Indigenous people, including the Papas Chase, Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Blackfoot, and Nakota Sioux, nations whose ancestors have cared for and nurtured these lands since time immemorial. Today, I'm going to give a brief overview of Solar Alberta. Then I will review a few of the solar industry trends in Alberta. Following that, I'm going to dive specifically into how residential solar works in Alberta, which will also apply commercially. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the property value implications. All right, after that, we'll do some Q&A and I'll make sure we let you folks chat at that time. So to begin, I'm pleased to share that this is Solar Alberta's 31st year of operation. Solar Alberta is a not-for-profit society that is dedicated to accelerating Alberta's transition to a just and sustainable energy future. And we do so by advocating, educating, and serving as an industry and community hub for solar energy. Our membership is made up of over 350 individuals and businesses. We provide a number of services, including managing a solar directory and a solar map through our website. In addition to our website services, we run a number of educational programs, such as professional development classes for the solar industry, a public solar webinar series on a number of Thursdays over the lunch hour throughout the year, as well as an incredible annual solar show, which is an online conference and trade show for the public and professionals alike. So save the dates of February 6th to 10th, 2023 in your calendar for our next one. There are also going to be sponsorships available for that soon. This coming July 21st, we're hosting a free webinar about solar ready builds. It's specifically oriented towards green builders. So if you or anyone you know would like to hear about how to design homes and businesses so that they're solar ready, please feel free to check it out at solaralberta.ca. All right, now you know a little bit more about us, and I'm going to share a bit of information about how solar arrays work in general, different types of arrays, of course, where home or rooftop installations fit in within the provincial solar picture. So just going to start with a little known fun fact. Did you know that with the increased demand, technological advancements, and more manufacturing of solar in recent history, we have seen the cost of solar modules drop by 90% in 10 years. That's solar PV. It's true. And that price drop is indicated by the blue line in this graph, and the blue bars show the increased production that matched that price drop. So you can, people used to see solar as a risky investment, but lately it's really viewed as a very logical and necessary component of our energy sector that will only grow in terms of usage as well as market share into the future. It's really important to realize when we talk about the growth, the recent growth of solar in Alberta, we are talking primarily about solar PV, and PV means solar photovoltaic. And we're not talking often about solar thermal. So solar PV is actually about harnessing the sun's light, while solar thermal is about harnessing the sun's heat. And solar PV is generally what's taking off in Alberta today, though there are some, of course, with solar thermal arrays. But when you're hearing about solar in the news and your friends are getting solar, I would say the vast majority of the time they're talking about solar PV these days. And that's partially because it works so well in northern climates. Solar PV actually likes the cold, and they use it even in space. So there are both small solar PV microgeneration arrays, and they are under 150 kilowatts. And then there are large microgeneration solar PV systems, and they're often called commercial systems, and you'll see them on businesses or not-for-profits. Anything under 5 megawatts is typically considered microgeneration in Alberta. And you've all likely spotted a solar array or two on a home in your neighborhood, but it's harder to see them on the commercial rooftops, of course, because they're often flatter and higher up. But here are some additional examples of large-scale commercial microgen taking shape around Alberta. The first one is Genesis Place in the city of Airdrie, on the recreation center there. We've also had Canmore Collegiate High School. Lots of schools were adopting solar. There was a recent Solar for Schools program through Alberta municipalities that alas has no funding left because of course we no longer have our provincial carbon tax, but which was, I think, funding it. But of course, many schools did adopt solar through that program. You see Freedom Cannabis in Atchison here, one of the largest rooftop arrays in the country. That, of course, a commercial installation. We're getting lots more of those these days on businesses, and many farmers looking to install solar right now. So actually, I would say that majority of phone calls I get from businesses looking at solar are farmers. So we routinely get those calls looking to install solar, but also looking at energy storage as well as heating and cooling pumps. Whether that's air source or ground source. So lots of interest from the farms these days. It's important to understand that all micro generation in Alberta, whether it's residential or commercial, must be built to a size that is equal to or less than their on-site consumption of energy over the course of a year. Micro generators in Alberta are not permitted to produce solar power for profit. This is according to the Government of Alberta microgeneration regulation. They have to produce as much as they consume, but not beyond that. So there's a lot of discussion about that in Alberta these days, because around the world, of course, that looks a little bit different. So we do have a session about that on our website and YouTube channel about the microgeneration regulations, if anyone wants to nerd out on regulations. So what we call microgeneration in Alberta grew at an incredible rate in the last 7 years. This graph shows that we had about 5 megawatts on the grid in 2015, and there are now over 120 megawatts of installed solar microgen capacity, and this number is growing daily. It actually amounts to over 8,100 systems in Alberta today on home and business rooftops. In addition to the rapid growth shown by this graph of microgen in Alberta, you can also see that we have had more large-scale microgeneration installations in recent years. So you can see the blue line goes up, meaning that the scale of the projects has been going up above the orange line there. So this is due to the rise in larger commercial projects, such as the ones on businesses, schools, and municipal buildings, like those described earlier. Larger projects between 1 to 5 megawatts were actually only enabled under amendments to the microgen regulation that took place in 2016. So those amendments in 2016 enabled some of the growth that we're seeing today. I love showing this picture. It's from the Government of Canada, and I want you to note it because not a lot of people realize that Alberta is next only to Saskatchewan as a solar energy hotspot in Canada. So Alberta and Saskatchewan are where it's at for solar in Canada in terms of our solar PV production potential. So that's just something to keep in mind. And you'll see even Edmonton is in a deep orange color. So some people think it's just southern Alberta that's the hotspot, but actually it goes all the way up northern Alberta as well. Even those yellow zones are very good for solar. All right, this is a little harder to see depending on the screen you're looking at, but hopefully you can see a whole bunch of little yellow dots there from the ISO website. And while the microgeneration growth that I was talking about is very impressive, and the residential component is, of course, what I'm going to focus in on today, the big story that you're hearing about in the news and everywhere is actually utility scale solar. So utility scale solar is a system that has the capacity to generate more than 5 megawatts of energy. And you can see many of the planned solar farms, the utility scale projects on this map in yellow dots. So there are quite a few. There were 117 megawatts of utility scale, which means solar farm type solar generating capacity in January 2020. By April 2022, that had increased from 117 to 892 megawatts. And solar farms are anticipated to have a generating capacity of an additional 10,500 by 2025. So this is just skyrocketing. You add it all up and we will likely have over 11,500 megawatts of solar in Alberta by 2025. There are even more projects being announced regularly because there's something of a gold rush on good solar land right now. So the difference with these utility scale PV systems is that they are highly regulated. Many land and other studies must be done before they can be developed, costing millions of dollars. And while permitting for a micro generation system, like on your home or business, might take anywhere from a few weeks to a couple months, to jump through all the hoops for these big farms, they're talking 2 to 3 or more years. So there's a pretty significant difference. So when people say, why can't I produce a lot of electricity with my small home array? It's partially because you don't have to jump through all the hoops. They've made it quite streamlined and simple for everyday Albertans to participate. And you don't have to jump through all those hoops. So they capped the amount that you can produce. So hopefully that helps a little bit. There are many reasons for the microgen regulations, but that is one of them. So of course, the difference with these utility scale PV systems, as I've already alluded to, is that they are highly regulated. Of course, they are also generating power as a commodity for profit. So rather than just offsetting their consumption or their energy consumption, what they're doing is they're actually selling power. It's a product. So they're selling either directly to the grid or in a power purchase agreement to a large company such as RBC or Labatt. So a lot of people, they get a little bit confused about the projects. They think, oh, that is an RBC solar project. No, what's happening is RBC or Labatt or those companies that are signing power purchase agreements are saying to a solar developer, I'm going to buy all of your energy. So they're actually the recipient of the energy. They're wanting to make sure that the energy they're consuming as a business is renewable. And so they're actually the customer or client. It's not actually their array. So hopefully that helps you understand the news these days when you hear about all the big businesses, Amazon and others that have sometimes the media says, oh, they have a solar farm. Well, no, they're usually signing an agreement to buy the product that solar farm is selling. So really, if you think of it in terms of like sheep, RBC is buying, sheep from a farmer in Alberta. So you could kind of make that jump in your mind when you're hearing the news. So the number of projects that have recently been announced here is truly astounding. It's important to remember, though, that solar still makes up about 5% of Alberta's generating capacity energy. So that's for the electricity grid. So we actually still have a long way to go. Renewables as a whole, when you include wind and other renewables, only make up about 25% of our generating capacity today. A good chunk of it is natural gas. A little bit is still coal, which is going to come offline next year, but a good chunk of it is natural gas. So we have a long way to go before our grid is truly clean, is truly net zero. We still have a lot of growth ahead of us. All right, we've talked a bit about microgeneration. We've talked a bit about utility scale generation. It is important to mention that there is a third type of generation or project in Alberta. We actually have community solar generation projects that are enabled here through legislation. So community generation is where a group of people come together and invest in a solar development that is not on their own property. A number of cooperatives and Indigenous nations are leading the charge when it comes to community generation in Alberta. And pictured here is the Métis Crossing Solar Farm. This project is 4.86 megawatts of community generation solar. And it was a collaboration between the Métis Nation of Alberta, the town of Smoky Lake, and Smoky Lake County. So it's very important to recognize that there is a third option that is starting to be explored today in Alberta. Community generation is still in its very early stages, but it will ideally give apartment dwellers, renters, and those who do not have solar appropriate roofs an opportunity to participate in solar. So if you are one of those people with like beautiful trees all around your home and your roof is really shaded, hopefully community generation investments will become an option for you down the road. All right, gonna just do a deep dive for one slide, so bear with me, but I think it's important for you folks to know because you're all likely details-oriented people. So I really want you to know exactly how the residential component of the solar sector looks. So the question we're gonna answer is, how do solar installations on rooftops work in Alberta? And most of this will apply commercially as well as residentially. So of course, first the sunlight will hit the solar modules. If we're looking at a solar PV array, we're looking at light. And those are installed on the roof of your home or garage, which is indicated by number 1. Typically, the modules will be installed on a south-facing roof. However, east and west-facing roofs can also work as alternative options in Alberta. And these photovoltaic modules convert sunlight into direct currents or DC electricity. Then this DC electricity will go into a little box called an inverter, and you actually get to see a little picture of my inverter there because I'm fortunate to have a solar array. So I've got photos of it on the slide today. So yeah, the DC electricity is going to go to the inverter, which is indicated by number 2. And that's going to convert the DC electricity from the solar array into alternating current or AC electricity. And that's the kind of electricity that the rest of the building uses and the grid uses. So this AC electricity will then be fed into your house's main electrical panel, which is indicated by number 3, which is a picture of my electrical panels. So you're getting an insight into my home, except my home's a row home, so it doesn't look exactly like this. From here, the electron generated by the solar panel can go into one of 2 directions. In the first case, if your house isn't consuming a lot of energy, so let's say it's 10 a.m., fewer people are home, unless you're like me and you're all still home because you're doing remote office work. But theoretically, we leave the home and 10 a.m. there are very few people there. So your solar system is probably producing a lot of energy because it's sunny outside, and the solar electron will then go out to the grid and spin your electricity meter, which is represented by number 4, backwards. And this solar electron that goes to the grid, represented by number 6, will show up as a credit line on your electricity bill. In the second case, your house is consuming a lot of energy. So for example, it's 4 o'clock, everyone just came home, turned all the lights on, all the kettles on, everything's on, we're making dinner. And the solar electron will then, in that situation, be used first to power the loads in your home, which is represented by number 5. So I think we can assume number 5 must be an electric car. Or in many cases, it's your electric stove or something electric in your home that's pumping hard at that time of day. And so the solar electron is going to go first to your home, but if you're not home or if you're busy out, it'll go out to the grid. So that's another way that it's going to reduce your electricity bill, is actually by being used up first in your home, so you're not drawing from the grid. So while this type of consumption where it's being used in the home won't show up explicitly on your electricity bill, what it will do is offset a kilowatt hour that you would have otherwise purchased from the grid. So it's like a hidden savings. All right, so the 2 or bidirectional meter, which is marked by number 4, which is supplied by the utility like NMAX, ATCO, Fortis, or EPCOR. And of course, depending where you are, you might have a local provider. Keeps track of the energy imported from the grid and the energy exported to the grid. And something important to consider, as I mentioned earlier, is that according to the government of Alberta, microgen regulations, with a residential system, solar installers cannot size your solar PV system so that it produces more energy than you consume in a year at the time of the installation. So for example, if your home consumes 5,000 kilowatt hours a year at present, you cannot install a system that will produce more than 500 kilowatt hours in a year. What this means is you're not allowed to build a really big solar system that is enough to charge like future purchases, like a future electric car, a future induction stove, a future electric water heater. It doesn't allow for that. Your solar PV system needs to be sized to your present load. Of course, you can always add to your existing solar system in the future once you purchase those things, which we're actually doing now that we have an electric vehicle at our home. We're adding 3 kilowatts onto our system. So that is an option, or you can purchase those things beforehand, and then of course they can be factored into your solar array. One other important thing to note is that in Alberta, your home will almost always remain connected to the utility grid, which is represented by number 6. It is very rare to see off-grid systems here. The grid essentially serves as a backup energy source that will supply you with electricity when you need more power than your system produces. For instance, at night, when it's cloudy or during the winter months, the grid essentially serves as your battery. So you don't have to worry about the reliability of your electricity. Or you don't have to have massive battery storage on site because you're going to use the grid in that way. So that's very important in Alberta. All right, I'm going to apologize now. I've got some script heavy slides coming your way, but you know, I figured you again would be interested in this information. So I'm going to give you the script heavy details. When reflecting on the financial considerations associated with a residential solar array, it's really important to realize that the cost of electricity will depend on particular retailers. There are regulated rate retailers such as EPCOR or NMAX, and then there are competitive price retailers such as a number of energy cooperatives and others. All the retailers will offer slightly different rates. And to shop around for an affordable rate, you can use the Utilities Consumer Advocate Cost Comparison Tool. It lays out all the different retailers available in Alberta and their different rates. If you put solar PV on your home, there are two utility bill components that it will reduce. First, it will reduce the amount you pay for electricity energy used. So with a properly sized system, over the course of the year, you should be able to save close to 100% of the energy charge component of your bill. This is the amount the power company will no longer get paid, given that they are no longer making your electricity. The credit that generates in the summer will offset your winter months when you are importing or buying electricity from your retailer. So you make lots in the summer and then use the credits for the winter. And hopefully over the year, it'll balance out for that component of your bill. So the second reduced utility bill component is the variable component of what you pay for transmission and distribution. Transmission and distribution costs are the costs for the wire systems and electrical infrastructure. Recording stopped. Ah, nice. Thanks, Lori. Appreciate that. I'll have to edit that bit later. Transmission and distribution costs. So the transmission and distribution costs, which some people call T&D, those have a component that can change based on the number of kilowatt hours you use. And they also have a fixed component, and that will not change regardless of how much energy you use in the month. So solar can save you money for the variable aspect of the transmission and distribution costs, but not the fixed component. And while there are many financial benefits to solar PV, please be aware that it will not fully reduce your transmission and distribution costs. As I mentioned, part of those are fixed, and it will not eliminate admin or local access fees. Those are fixed costs related to simply being on the grid. And of course, simply receiving your bills and your credits. So the impact, your home, and also solar PV will not impact your home heating charges or water heating charges unless you have an electrical water heating setup or a solar thermal setup. So your home heating costs can actually be about 40% of your monthly utility bills in Alberta, and solar PV can't address those unless you happen to be using electricity to heat your home or water. In Alberta, most houses are still using natural gas for these sorts of things. And of course, your solar is not linked to those utility bills. You could, however, move towards a full net zero energy use and reduce your utility bills further by installing an air or ground source pump for home heating and cooling, or an electric water heat pump that your solar system charges. Alternatively, you could look at, as I mentioned, installing solar thermal as your water heating system. So these are some things that are kind of cost prohibitive for a lot of Albertans, but they are optional and would move you towards net zero, full net zero, and full utility bill offsetting, other than the fixed costs of the transmission and distribution. Of course, another factor to consider is that in Alberta, you can participate in what's called the Solar Club with your retailer. And the Solar Club is an option for where some retailers will offer you a different electricity rate during the summer than you would pay in the winter. So this is beneficial because in the summer, your system is generating more energy. So theoretically, if you decide to price it higher in the summer, you could get more money from exporting to the grid on that higher rate, versus in the winter, you might want to select a lower rate from your retailer because you're not generating as much, and therefore you'd be paying a lower rate. So something to look into with a retailer if you do get solar is the Solar Club. Renewable energy and energy efficiency upgrades are home improvements that pay for themselves. Given that solar panels are warranted for 25 years and can last up to 40 years, they will be adding value to your home for quite some time and paying for themselves by reducing your monthly electricity bills. It's really important to keep all of these benefits in mind when thinking about the return on investment. So now that the Canada Greener Home Grant is in place, a typical home install can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000. I've heard quotes today. I was reading on Facebook, a lot of folks getting around 10 kilowatts for about 16,000. I know ours, we ended up around 13,000, I think, for a 6-7 kilowatt system. So usually it will take about 5 to 10 years to pay back, depending on the amount of energy you consume and other financing mechanisms and whatnot. Installers should calculate the estimated payback time as part of the initial quote process. This is really hard to estimate without looking at your particular circumstances. Since the system will be sized to the current site electrical usage, homeowners can ultimately improve on the estimated payback time by further reducing your energy consumption or performing energy efficiency upgrades after the installation has been completed. There's lots of incentive there to reduce your energy consumption. So although an installation of $5,000 to $20,000 is too much for many Albertans to afford, there is a new solar financing program in many municipalities around Alberta that is increasing the uptake of solar by lower income homeowners or those on a fixed income. It's called CEAP. It stands for Clean Energy Improvement Program. And it's essentially Alberta's version of a program that you might have heard of called PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, in other jurisdictions. CEAP was made possible through recent changes to the Municipal Government Act, and we anticipate it will and already is dramatically increasing the uptake of solar and energy efficiency upgrades on homes and businesses. If a municipality has CEAP financing in place, then in those cases, folks can get their solar array or their energy efficiency upgrades without putting money down. They can begin to then pay back the loan as they're recognizing the benefits from their solar installation on their utility bills. So often these are very low interest loans that you can pay off while you're seeing savings. So it's quite a good deal. Additionally, with CEAP, the monthly payments will be passed on to the next homeowner. So it's attached to your property bill every month. And so if people move before they complete the payments, they just pass it on to the next person. So CEAP is currently offered in Leduc, Devon, Rocky Mountain House, and there's a pilot now in Edmonton that's already fully subscribed. New CEAP programs are also expected in the next year or so within Canmore, St. Albert, Hinton, Okotoks, Calgary, and beyond. There might be some additional costs associated with a solar array if your roof or electrical wiring need to be upgraded or replaced. But in some cases, the CEAP financing can also include some of those sort of wraparound things that are needed. MyCEAP, myceip.ca is where you go to find out if there's a municipality that you work in that is adopting that program. Additionally, the Canada Greener Homes Loan just rolled out last week. So that was quite amazing to see. They're offering interest-free loans. And that will, of course, bring the payback period down even further for Canadians. All right, other than CEAP, financing and the new Canada Greener Homes Loan and the Canada Greener Homes Grant, that's for about $5,000 off an array. So there's lots of incentives right now. You'll also likely be interested to hear that there are still some municipal solar incentives in place as well. So certain municipalities like the City of Edmonton, Medicine Hat, Banff, Town of Canmore, they're all still offering some form of rebate despite the provincial rebate having ended. So there's lots of different financial mechanisms at play there. Got more info about that on my website if you need it. So here's my last big slide, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. I just wanted to really tailor this to the demographics who are attending today. When it comes to solar related property value estimates, which I imagine interest all of you, and Lori and I were talking about last week, it's important to know that a net zero ready home in Alberta, which typically would mean solar ready if it's a net zero ready, the cost of being like solar ready, net zero ready, would typically be about $4,000 per door, more than your average home. And then of course there's the installation of the solar on top of that, as you know, 5 to 20,000. So upgrading a home after the fact to be solar ready or to integrate solar can actually be considerably more if you don't have a lot of those upfront details taken care of. There isn't much data available in Canada yet regarding home resale value with solar, but recent research in the US indicates that homes with solar power typically sell for 4.1% more than those without. This is likely because a house with solar panels already installed will have significantly reduced future electricity bills, which many home buyers appreciate. And because solar panels are typically warranted for 25 years and actually last much longer, then of course, these are a long-term improvement to a home. As we like to say at Solar Alberta, solar PV is the only home improvement that actually pays for itself. So while there are benefits with solar PV in terms of resale value, solar-friendly municipalities across the country typically don't include the added value of solar PV in standard municipal tax assessments. This exclusion is aimed at avoiding the potential disincentive from taking climate action. So if people see that taking climate action is going to mean paying more property taxes, then they might not do it. And then we have this vicious cycle of climate change continuing, right? And so a lot of folks, it's recommended that municipalities adopt solar-friendly approaches, which means not including sort of that 4.1% value add on the home when they're assessing it for property taxes. This is particularly important for commercial properties because the size of array on the property is much larger. So the property value increase in absolute terms is much greater and can give people some sticker shock and scare them off of getting solar arrays. I do get some calls from municipalities, from solar installers who've had really important projects dropped because someone got scared of a $3,000 a year increase in property taxes. So that's really sad for climate justice and action. And we're really hoping that municipalities in Alberta will take that in consideration. So as you can see on this slide, all of Ontario does not include solar PV in tax assessments. Halifax and Nova Scotia do not. And Alberta's very own Municipal Climate Change Action Center, I think they're going by Alberta municipalities right now, a branch of the AUMA and RMA, they additionally recommend that Albertan municipalities adopt solar-friendly approaches and leave solar PV out of property value assessments. Of course, in Alberta, that's up to each individual municipality. It's not been provincially determined. So I'm going to stop my screen share there, and feel free to turn on your cameras and we can do a Q&A. And Lori, do you want to moderate or do you want me to just wing it? I don't mind either way. There we go. Hold down my presentation.
You can wing it. I don't see any hands raised.
Yeah, well, feel free. So on the bottom toolbar, you'll see reactions there. And you can click on reactions and raise your hand, and then we can unmute you. Alternatively, if you can't find that reactions button, I know I have a very good friend who's never been able to find it. Just turn on your camera and wave with your question. Or a third option would be to enter your question in the chat box. So there are three ways to ask questions if you have them. I'm happy to dialogue further about any of these topics or more if there's anything we haven't touched on today. So hopefully a few of you will pop up your questions here. Not yet, but I feel like Lori, you had quite a few last week. You might have to start peppering me with them.
Yeah, no. These people are smarter than me.
Oh, I liked your questions. They were excellent. Okay, David has a question, and can't seem to find, oh, here you are. So I'll ask David to unmute. And hopefully you can ask it there. David, are you able to unmute right now? Here, what I'll do is I'm going to change the settings. I'm going to say allow you to unmute yourselves. I'm going to be very trusting here. So hopefully that helps you to unmute yourself. Oh, there are multiple
Hi.
Davids there. I was asking the wrong David to unmute. There we go. Hi, David.
Thanks for the presentation, Heather. My question is there any potential structure issue with residential solar panel installation on the roof?
There can be. So if it's a non-standard roof or a larger roof, it is required by a PEGA, I believe, that a structural engineer sign off on those roof designs. I know I have a home roof, and your typical residential, like your typical house these days that's being built will usually be fine structurally, but garages often are not. So even though I'm in a solar ready home, my garage is not structurally able to handle and support solar. So they would need to add, basically they just can't support the weight, right? And so you have to actually have a properly supported roof structure. So yeah, engineers are often required to sign off on designs, especially if the roof is not a standard roof. And that can add costs. So that's why when the clean energy improvement rolled out in most municipalities, they often said, if you need to upgrade your roof, you can include that in the program financing. I know that happened at my church too. They were, considering a solar array, and the first and foremost, it was an old building, so we had to update the roof first. You might want to do that too, because often people will also want to make sure that, once your array is up, you don't want to have to pull your shingles down, right? But good installers will do a rooftop assessment for you. So you shouldn't have to guess whether your roof is good. The installer should be able to tell you whether it's adequate or not. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question. So in terms of the maintenance of solar panels, can it be done by the homeowners, or is it something that professionals have to come in and do annual evaluation?
So there's very little maintenance involved with solar arrays. And typically when you get an installation done, there'll be a warranty on work for, I think, like 2 years or so if there's any issues. For example, for our solar array, it turns out they put it a bit too close to the dryer duct on our roof. And so the company had a program where they come right back and just moved it over a little bit. You won't get much damage from anything else. Solar panels are built very durably. You may have noticed in southern Alberta right now, they're using solar to protect cars at dealerships, and they're using them to protect livestock. They're really built to withstand a lot of extreme weather. If you had a really bad storm with hail the size of a fist, yes, the solar companies would have to come and swap those out. You wouldn't be able to do it yourself. So we really recommend against individual Albertans getting up on their roof and messing around with their installations. It can be very dangerous for you, and often most Albertans will cause more damage than they can fix. That said, there are the rare few who have enough electrical understanding and knowledge to do some adjustments themselves. So usually you have a good ongoing relationship with your solar panel installer. And if anything drastic happens and for some reason your solar installer is not around, there are a lot of, I have 130 business members, and they will go out and fix other people's roofs if the original installer is no longer there. So I hope that helps answer your question, but really maintenance is rather low. You might need them to put up some protective sort of structures to reduce the number of birds pooping on the array. So we're looking at getting that this year because the pigeons have decided they like our roof. So, but they have some technology they can install for that. So Lori, I see your hand up there. Do you want to unmute?
Yeah, we have a couple questions in the chat. And I'm not sure if the one was answered by your answer, but can an experienced homeowner pull in their own permits and install?
Yes, it is allowed. You would have to have an electrician sign off. That is required by law in Alberta for all solar arrays. it can be very challenging. So, and time consuming to go through that process. You'll want to connect with your wire provider, because you'll have to get the solar installation reviewed and approved by your wire provider. We do have programs at Solar Alberta that can help with that. So we have a wire providers class that we offer. It's like a professional development program, helps you navigate all the different wire providers. We have some free webinars about the various wire providers. We have a workshop on our website called the top 10 issues that inspectors will find. So anyone doing their own, pulling their own permits, doing their own design will also have to pass their own inspections. So you'll want to maybe take some of our workshops. Solar Alberta itself started out as a do-it-yourself club. So a lot of our resources are really tailored to people who would otherwise do it themselves. Most of those people have gone on to become industry experts. So nowadays we actually recommend you hire them. And one thing I have seen done though is sometimes people will hire one of our installation companies to do the design and to help them with the permitting, but they'll work out an agreement where they're going to actually do the install themselves if they feel that they can. So I've seen that happen occasionally, where you kind of parcel out components of it in a dialogue with the company. I know a few people who have done that, but definitely a lot easier not to. We're one of those folks who, we decided to get solar in July. We had everything signed off with our installer, and they had the installation done before we even moved into our home. So that was quite nice. So if you have the time and energy, though, you can jump through the hoops yourself, but you'll need some coaching from your wire provider. You'll probably want to take some of our courses and our free workshops, and yeah, check out our website for all those great resources. So good question. And
the second question.
It's okay, great.
Does having solar affect your property insurance rates?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I haven't noticed it affecting mine. I think I've noticed that when you get a green car, they actually reduce your insurance coverage. So I'll have to check into that, Teresa. I don't know if we had the same benefit from our solar array, so I'm not sure. But ultimately it should, in theory, because one thing to know about solar is it is a protective coating. So will actually make your roof last longer and whatnot. So in many ways, it is kind of nice and should ideally reduce your insurance rates. But I don't think I've heard of that happening. So I'll have to check in on that, Teresa. And if you want to fire me an email at heather@solaralberta.ca, I will find out for sure from our members if that's the case. Okay, I see Renee saying pigeons and squirrel guards can be installed after the fact. Yep, that's exactly what we're doing, because we didn't know we were going to be so popular for pigeons, but we now are. So that is a possibility for sure. Great. Not seeing any more hands. Not seeing any more questions in the chat, but feel free. I don't want to rush anyone. Oh, here we go, Quentin. What is the current state solar panel disposal practices? Great question. So Solar Alberta has actually been working with ARMA, the Alberta Recycling Management Authority, on the first Canadian recycling program for solar PV. And we have the introduction to that. If you go to our YouTube channel or our website, we actually have a webinar about solar PV recycling, and it featured Ed Guggenheimer, who's ED for ARMA, and talking about, this was last year, the 2021 solar show, talking about their pilot of solar PV recycling. So the current state is that ARMA what has been busily collecting any of the destroyed solar PV panels from around Alberta. There weren't too many at first, so that was challenging to find some that needed disposal. And then they brought them on site, and they've been figuring out the cost of recycling here. You can recycle over 90% of solar panels. Many times they can actually be used for new solar PV manufacturing. So I strongly suspect we're going to have a big secondary market here in Alberta in the near future. The other thing that's interesting is as they got into it, they realized, a lot of these solar panels actually still have life in them. They could have been reused. We don't need to destroy them. So now they're actually working on a big solar PV reuse pilot in addition to their recycle pilot. So we're really hoping at Solar Show 2023 to get an update from ARMA on their reuse and recycling program, because a lot of solar panels might be broken in a small part, but they might still actually work 75% of them. And your typical home or business owner may not want that panel if it's not 100%, if it's not optimal. But there are many places and spaces where reuse is a good option, including, if you're running irrigation pump in the middle of a farm and you need some power, you don't necessarily need the most optimal array possible. You just need to power the pump. So there's lots of markets for reuse, and in the US, there's actually quite a strong secondary market for solar panels as well. And I see Sheldon here is saying, do you think that costs for solar PV will continue to go down? Back in 2016, he'd heard it would take about 13 years to pay off. Yeah, so I don't know if the cost of solar PV will continue to go down much further. I think if anyone's just sitting around and waiting for it to go further, I would say probably stop waiting. This is probably prime time, especially with all the incentives in place right now. The one thing that will likely go away is the incentives. And the reason for that is because it is so advantageous to have solar that some government officials like the UCP and others feel like the market is shaping this now, we don't need to intervene. So if anything's going to go away, it'll probably be the incentives. So I actually think the cost of solar PV is probably might go down a little bit now. But the cost for individuals will probably go up over time because our incentives will drop off as it becomes just very economically sensible and logical to get solar PV. So I don't want to rush anyone, but I do think now is probably prime time from a political perspective. All those federal supports that are in place, they might not be around forever. So I hope that answers the question. Great. I have a lot of great questions. I really appreciate it.